Hello everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Adrian Lloyd. This is just my stupid opinion. I decided for this episode that I was going to rock the Globo Gym Purple Cobra shirt. Anybody who has seen the movie Dodgeball will know what I'm talking about. The shirt actually looks blue in the light. Well, at least the way I'm seeing it through the camera. So it looks blue, but it's actually purple. So I don't know why that's happening, but anyway. So, we're going to start off today with a few different stories. The first one I wanted to talk about today is Dr. Jordan Peterson, somebody I've brought up many times before on this podcast. He's one of my many influences into doing this and just for my political change over the last year or two. Anyway, the reason I bring him up is because I was browsing Twitter a couple days ago and I found a tweet by him. He had put out a tweet with a picture in it, and it was actually, as you can see here, it says, he's captioned as, "Those who consider themselves my enemies have been posting these all around my home neighborhood." And as we take a closer look at it, we can see it's a community safety bulletin, and it's targeting himself in his own home neighborhood. And it says, "Jordan Peterson, a local man teaching at the University of Toronto, has been campaigning against the human rights of women, people of color, Muslims, and LGBT people for over a year. Peterson has an open association with the neo-Nazis and the alt-right, even being referred to as a Nazi philosopher by the leader of the New Constitution Party of Canada. Due to pressure from Jordan Peterson's alt-right fanbase, the University of Toronto has not taken any action to fire him or disavow his attacks on minority groups. Unacceptable? We think so. Call David Cameron at the University of Toronto to let him know what you think." And then they give out the number and the email for the office of the dean. This really pissed me off when I came across it, because this community safety bulletin is full of lies. As we go through it, we can break it down little by little and see that none of it is true. He says he's been campaigning against human rights of women, people of color, Muslims, and LGBT. Well, they say that he campaigns against the human rights of women because he talks about the difference in gender. This is also why they accuse him of being against the LGBT community, because he won't use the gender pronouns and he believes in the binary, such as myself. I believe in the binary. Then they make reference to Muslims and people of color. I'm pretty sure you could probably just put these two together because the people of color they're probably referencing to are the Muslims. But this is probably because he was opposed to M103, the motion that was looking into Islamophobia. Again, it's just a motion looking into it, but if a bill was to arise from it, then we'd have serious problems. At the moment, it doesn't do anything. It could be something that the government does look into. It could just be the government virtue signaling. I, too, was against Motion 103. I'm sure I have videos up on YouTube or other ones. I'm sure I have episodes up where I was talking about it. And I was against it, but we did have to recognize that it was just a motion. However, because he's talked about the problems with Islam and Islam as a religion, he also campaigns against their human rights. But these are all bullshit allegations they're leveling against him. As we can see, he's just a man with an opinion. And then they say he has open associations with neo-Nazis and the alt-right. Open association with them? No. Peterson has time and time again disavowed the alt-right, the white nationalists. They're making reference to this because he is close association with the Kekistani people, which, sure, there are alt-right people who are Kekistani, but Kekistanis are just all over. They're just people who are done with identity politics and want to give a big fuck you to the system. So that's all Kekistanis are, really. And it's just something that appeals to the white nationalists and the neo-Nazis. But he doesn't have open affiliation with them. In fact, he put out a video a few months ago where he was wrongly associated as being part of the far right. And he went back and he emailed the author and he told them, I'm not far right, I am a classic liberal. Classic British liberal. But they're putting these up in his own neighborhood. They've already tried before to go after him at his job. They did it last year, and they've taken a couple different shots at him trying to get him fired, which hasn't worked. So this is another attack against his character. But this time they went farther. Not only did they go after his job, now they went after his personal life too, which they've already tried, but this is on a different level. They went to his neighborhood, put up flyers, probably too, I would not be surprised, dropped them in mailboxes all around, and probably put them on doorsteps all over, to all his neighbors, slandering him as a neo-Nazi and part of the alt-right, which would make him a white nationalist too, which are complete bullshit. But have no fear for any Jordan Peterson fans out there who happen to be watching this. I'm sure by now you already know what's happened, but when Jordan Peterson tweeted this out, there was a campaign by his followers who emailed and called the University of Toronto and the Dean's office in support of Jordan Peterson. I happen to be one of them. This is my email I sent out. I just blanked out my email address because I don't want people sending me random emails to my personal email. But all I did is I put up my 2 cents on it. I told the dean how I felt that what was being said was a pack of lies and was propaganda, and at the same time, while this is an attack on Jordan Peterson, this is too an attack on the dean, David Cameron, because they're saying that he is not doing anything about this, associating himself with the alt-right neo-Nazis, especially someone like Jordan Peterson is a well-known figure, so they would be associating with a high-ranking figure of the neo-Nazi and alt-right movement, and that David Cameron is refusing to do anything about it, showing his complicity in white nationalism and Nazism. So this is as much a slanderous attack on David Cameron and the Dean and the University of Toronto as it is on Jordan Peterson himself, although it is a direct attack on Jordan Peterson as he is the main target. But by association, David Cameron is being attacked just as much, slandered just as much, and he needs to do something about this and put an end to this. Personally, I told him that he should stand with our side, Jordan Peterson's side. While I don't agree with Jordan Peterson on everything, one of the things I do disagree with him on a bit is religion. Of course I would to do that. But all in all, he is a good voice of reason in a time like this, and a necessary one. Him, along with people like Gadsad, Joe Rogan, and several others, are necessary people who need their voices heard because they bring actual truth and sense to the world. I know some people are put off, at least by Gadsad's satire and sarcastic nature, but I actually happen to love it. But I just wanted to bring attention to this and just show to the extent that Jordan Peterson's enemies have to go to slander him. And this won't work. He's gotten too much support over the last year, and especially he's gotten too much support from his followers and his fans through this event. And he's been through so much more in the last year that this is not going to stop him. It's not going to get him fired. But it is once again a slanderous attack used by his enemies against him. All because he believes in the binary gender system, he has problems with Islam, and because he doesn't believe that women can do everything a man can do. And let's be honest, sure, a woman can do what a man can do, but that doesn't mean she's going to do it to just as the same degree. She's not going to be as good at it. And the same thing goes in reverse. There are things that women are good at that men would be not nearly as good at. We could do them, but we wouldn't be as good. But from here, we move on to 2 articles from campusreform.com. I ended up stating in my last episode that I did, at one point, I was talking about the British Medical Association, how they, at least for their research and while discussing amongst themselves, they had decided that pregnant women was offensive to intersex and trans men. So for that reason, they were going to call them pregnant people. I stated in the last episode, I said, how long until math is going to be considered sexist? I figured it would have to do with the Cartesian plane, with having to do with the X and Y axis. If you take the X and Y and think of them as chromosomes, X and Y makes a male. So I thought there would be in some way. And the next day, I was partly proven right, because this article got tweeted out. It was actually tweeted out by Jordan Peterson, I saw it after I saw the last thing. But anyway, this article said that a professor believed that algebra and geometry perpetuate white privilege. I gotta say, that's pretty damn close. I mean, I was kind of off by saying it would be sexist, not white privilege or racism. But you gotta say, that's not that far off. And the second article from this actually had to do with math being sexist, although we'll get to that, and that article came out, I believe, at the end of August, so Toni Eraksinen. She was the one who wrote both these articles. She did a great job on them. But anyway, in this first one where it says, Professor, Algebra, Geometry perpetuate white privilege, it says, Gutierrez worries that algebra and geometry perpetuate privilege because emphasizing terms like Pythagorean theorem and pi give the impressions that math was largely developed by Greeks and other Europeans. That's because it was. Now, there are some other influences out there, but Europeans, more specifically the Greeks, had a lot to do with math. She also worries that the evaluation of math skills can perpetuate discrimination against minorities, especially if they do worse than their white counterparts. Okay, but what if the white people do worse than another one? Like, let's say Asians score better. Would that be then that math perpetuates Asian privilege? Seems kind of dumb to me. Considering how a lot of black guys tend to be more athletic and better at sports than us white guys, would that mean that gym class perpetuates black privilege? I know, I'm probably going to have somebody that comments be like, you just don't get it. You don't understand. You cannot have black privilege, but white privilege is everywhere. But anyway, this article goes on to say, a math education professor at the University of Illinois argued in a newly published book that algebraic and geometry skill perpetuate unearned privilege among whites. Rochelle Gutierrez, a professor at the University of Illinois, made the claim in a new anthology for math teachers, arguing that teachers must be aware of the politics that mathematics bring in society. The politics that mathematics bring? 2 + 2 = 4 brings politics with it? So who is this woman, Rochelle Gutierrez? Well, we have her biography right here from the University of Illinois. It states, Dr. Gutierrez's scholarship focuses on equity issue in mathematics education, paying particular attention to how race, class, and language affect teaching and learning. That's what her scholarship focuses on. It doesn't seem like it has much to do with math itself, but it seems like it has more to do with the equity and the fairness that comes with math. Through in-depth analysis of effective teaching/learning communities and longitudinal studies of developing and practicing teachers, her work challenges deficit views of students who are Latina, Black, and or American Indian, and suggests that mathematics teachers need to be prepared with much more than just content knowledge, pedagogical knowledge, or knowledge of diverse students if they are going to be successful. Her current research project focuses upon developing in pre-service teachers the knowledge and the disposition to teach powerful mathematics to urban students, the roles of uncertainty, tension, and nepenthe in teaching, and the political knowledge and forms of creative insubordination that mathematics teachers need to effectively teach in an era of high-stakes education. She talks about the language that is requiring the politics that come with it. I'll tell you one thing. Even though my classes are still on strike, despite this, I'm still doing physics classes, math classes. There's no politics that comes with it. You need to learn how to do it. It's important. I mean, I didn't even think about how much math I need when I'm in construction engineering. I knew I'd need it, but shit, I didn't know to how much or how crazy the formulas were going to be. I mean, I'm not the best at math, but there's no politics. You just need to learn it, and it's difficult for some, but it's a necessary part of survival in this day and age. But anyway, she ended up using a word there at the end. She said it was nepenthe. So I ended up looking up what nepenthe was, and just for this one, I was a little lazy on it. I just went to Wikipedia for it, and it says nepenthe is a concept used in Chicano and Latino anthropology, social commentary, criticism, literature, and art. It represents a concept of in-betweenness. Nepantla is a Nahuti word which means in the middle of it, or middle. So if we go back and say to what she stated her current research project focused on developing in pre-service teachers the knowledge and disposition to teach powerful mathematics to urban students, the role of uncertainty, tension, and in-betweenness in teacher and political knowledge is what she's saying. Does that make any fucking sense to you? Not to me. This is a bunch of gibberish bullshit that she's trying to preach to say, oh, you know what, some people don't do as well at math. Well, it's because of racism and society, because that's why they don't do so well. Not because the people this may not be good at math or may never have been taught it until a certain age. That sometimes happens. Sometimes people in certain areas aren't taught math from a certain age, but over here we're taught math since like what? Well, at least basic math since like kindergarten, grade 1. We learn 1 plus 1. There are many places where maybe they don't learn it till later on, so they're not as skilled as us. But the whole thing just sounds like a bunch of gibberish bullshit to me, like she's making up a bunch of excuses. Pretty much she's justifying the existence of her job. Because if she doesn't justify it, then what the fuck is she doing? What the fuck is she here for? When we look at her teaching, it says, I teach secondary mathematics methods courses to students who are undergraduates in mathematics and seeking a minor in education. I also teach a large undergraduate seminar on social justice, schooling, and society that is open to students from all disciplines, not just education. So she teaches social justice. No surprise. For practicing students and graduate students in the college education, I teach courses on socio-political perspectives on mathematics and science education. Oh, great. Urban education, reflective teaching, and the mathematics, science, and engineering pro seminar that prepares graduate students to write research articles and understand the publishing process. So her math classes that she teaches, really, she teaches them to publish papers, and she teaches them social justice in math and science. She's not a math teacher. I've had math teachers. I've had math professors. You know what they do? They come in and they teach you how to fucking do it. They put the formulas on the board and they say, here's how you get from here to here. That's a real math teacher. You know what I learned from my math teacher last year? It was really cool. I probably couldn't really explain it without showing it, but he taught me a really fast and easy way to get the lowest common denominator, which is whatever numbers you're dealing with, you break them down to their prime factors. And then from there, you use those numbers in order to calculate the lowest common denominator. It's a little, again, I can't really, without showing you on paper, do it. But it was a really cool method. And it was fast and easy. Before, I was that dude that would just take all the numbers and keep calculating them until I came up to the same goddamn number. But this way, you could do it in a minute. It was awesome. That's a real math teacher. My math teacher, second semester last year, was the best math teacher I ever had. As we continue down this article, Gutierrez goes on to say, on many levels, mathematics itself operates as whiteness. Once again, I don't understand what you're trying to say in this. Mathematics operates as whiteness. What does that mean? Mathematics can't dance? Is that what you're trying to say? Who gets credit for doing and developing mathematics? Who is capable in mathematics and who is seen as part of the mathematics community is generally viewed as white, Gutierrez argued. Hasn't the stereotype always been that Asians are good at math? That Asians are amazing at math? That Western gifted programs are a joke in Asian countries? So how is it generally viewed as white? My professors, from math to physics, have been all over the spectrum. I have an Asian professor who teaches me math. I've had 2 Middle Eastern professors. One taught me math. The one I have currently is teaching me physics. I have a white professor teaching me physics right now. And I also had another white professor. So the only one I haven't had in the math would be a black professor. But other than that, I've had a pretty damn diverse math section. And whenever I've seen any of the other professors from the math departments or the physics department who do the same things as the other teachers, they're generally mixed. I see some from all over. So I don't know how it's generally viewed as white. But maybe that's just my white privilege getting in the way. Gutierrez also worried that algebra and geometry perpetuate privilege, fretting that curricula emphasizes terms like Pythagorean theorem and pi perpetuate a perception that mathematics are largely developed by Greeks and other Europeans. Well, part of the reason it may seem like using the term Pythagorean theorem might sound Greek is because the theorem was named after the fucking guy who found it. And then pi and a bunch of other Greek symbols are used because when we establishing math, these were the symbols used, the Greek alphabet. So we use these terms because this is how they've been established. But don't take my word for it. Why don't you take livescience.com's word about it? So the article is called What is Algebra? Published on March 26, 2015. Oh shit, at 2 in the morning. Alright. Algebra is a branch of mathematics dealing with symbols and the rules for manipulating those symbols. In elementary algebra, those symbols, today written as Latin and Greek letters, represent quantities without fixed values known as variables. Just as sentences describe relationships between specific words, in algebra, equations describe relationships between variables. So that is the relationship with math. And then if we go a little farther down, the article ends up stating that this problem was almost certainly written to help students understand mathematics. What he was saying, the article is making a joke about how a lot of students would say algebra was created to make their lives miserable. So he says, but what is special about it is nearly 4,000 years old. Algebra is nearly 4,000 years old. So we're going back to the time of ancient Greeks, who are one of the oldest cultures around. Not the oldest, but one of them. One of the ones that we know about today is one of the most ancient cultures are the Greeks. Now, they did not invent mathematics because there is evidence that it goes back to even Babylonian times and Sumerian times. So they did not necessarily quite invent the whole mathematic thing, but the Greeks perfected the mathematics into what became the roots that we use today. We have evolved on these equations, we have evolved on these strategies, but if we were to trace our understanding of math back to the root, this is where we're going back to, the ancient Greeks. According to Jacques Cessiano in An Introduction to the History of Algebra, this problem is based on a Babylonian clay tablet circa 1800 BC. There we go. Since these roots in ancient Mesopotamia, algebra has been central to many advances in science, technology, and civilization as a whole. The language of algebra has varied significantly across the history of all civilizations to inherit it, including our own. And we can look a little more into it. We go to inmath.com, and the article is called Math, It's All Greek to Me. And what it says is Greek is probably the oldest European language, spoken 4,000 years and written form for 3,000 years. Greek was used across the Middle East and as far away as India during the Hellenistic period, which is 33 BC to 100 Common Era. The early Christian writers used Greek, and one passage is say God is the Alpha and Omega. Alpha and Omega, the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, to mean he is the beginning and the end. It was the official language of the Byzantine Empire, the Roman civilization centered in Constantinople, present-day Istanbul and Turkey, 380 to 1483 Common Era, which stretches around most of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Importantly, for its common use in mathematics, Greek was used widely for publishing scientific discoveries during the European Renaissance, the 15th century. So Greek has been historically used as a language, and especially in mathematics, throughout history. And this is not just in Europe, it even says to the Middle East all the way to India. So we're spanning almost the entire known world at the time. The Greeks have always been very influential throughout history, especially back in those times. This is why we use so many Greek terms, we use Greek alphabet, is because it was so widely used. It was so common at the time across. It was probably the most common language to write mathematical terms in. Because if you did it in, say, Latin, well, once you get over to India or the Middle East, they're probably not going to know Latin. But then when you write it in Greek, from one end of the world to the next, almost every single civilization could understand it. Their mathematicians would understand it. So this is why, historically, it's been used as Greek, and why we use so many Greek terms, even though Indian and Middle Eastern and Chinese mathematicians have played their influential role in forming mathematics. The reason is because Greek goes back the farthest, and Greek is the most widely used in mathematics. And I just wanted to do a little bit of update. The Pythagorean theorem actually was written in the 6th century BC with the Pythagoreans who coined the term mathematics from the ancient Greek, mathema, meaning the subject of the instruction. So I was a little wrong on the last part, but the Pythagoreans were an actual group of people. So as we return the article, it says, math also helped actively perpetuate white privilege too, since the way our economy places a premium on math skill gives math a form of unearned privilege for math professors who are disproportionately white. And she ends up saying, are we really that smart just because we do mathematics? Further wondering why math professors get more research grants than social studies or English professors. Are you serious? You wonder why? Mathematics is the base for everything. We have so much understanding from math. Even if you think about building a house, basic mathematics is required. You can't just build up a bunch of walls, put a fucking roof on there because there's a few different things you're not taking into consideration. This is actually, in fact, what I am learning right now in school. See, here's a good example. You can put up 4 walls and a roof, but then what happens if it rains? You've got to take into consideration the material you're using. Are you using wood? Is it have some sort of finishing on it to prevent it from rotting? What about when it gets really windy or it snows? Is your house able to withstand the load? Because that's one thing we're learning right now is different weight loads. We're learning about bridges, we're learning on homes. Physics and mathematics is very important. Another example is a bridge for this. I could design a bridge, but if I designed a bridge, didn't do any equations and can't really test it out to see how heavy it is, would you want an 18-wheeler driving over it? Because these are the sort of things we need right now. We don't just build bridges and make them really big and really strong and pray that they don't break. We take things into consideration. When we're doing a bridge right now, they take into consideration how much the whole thing is going to weigh in and of itself, how much support is used, and what is going to be the max amount of cars and weight on there. And then when they've established all that, through mathematics, they build their bridge. Because if we just went and build our bridge, what happens on rush hour and there's a jam on the bridge and then all of a sudden we have a bunch of cars on there that can't take the load and then boom, everybody's dead. That's just basics for building. How could we have found out that the world was round? They did this through mathematics and astrology. They used astrology to measure the different stars, and they used mathematics to tell that the Earth was curved. How could a sniper shoot long range without using mathematics to take into account the curvature of the Earth? How can we build something on the steep side of a mountain or a cliff or just a steep hill without it falling over without using mathematics? These are basics, but there's plenty more examples. Are we so smart? How could we have the monetary system we have now if we don't know mathematics? If you gave me $1 and I'm supposed to give you 50 cents back and I have no fucking understanding of numbers, am I going to give you the right change? So the fact that she even asked, are we really that smart? The fact we know mathematics. Yes, Yes, in fact, humans are very smart for knowing mathematics. I do believe that animals in and of themselves have a very basic understanding of mathematics. I mean, for instance, if a mother duck knows when one of her babies are gone, and it's not probably just from recognition, but it's from, counting. She knows how many babies she has. So I believe they have basic understanding in that way. But an animal cannot do mathematics. An animal doesn't understand how to divide or how to multiply. It doesn't understand 6 times 2 equals 12. This was one of our biggest advancements. And in fact, mathematics allows us to... Here's a good one. How could scientists have landed a satellite on an asteroid going thousands of miles an hour in space without mathematics? Almost everything that we've been able to do in our society that has progressed us has been mathematics. I'm a guy who hates math and numbers. I don't like it. I'm not that great at it. But I understand the relevance that it had. Mathematics is... You know what? I really can't say any more on it without repeating myself, so I'm going to end right now with that. But I would like to quickly say that why do mathematics get more grants than social studies and English? Because social studies and English classes are bullshit these days. They're pointless. I had a English class. It was communications class, they called it. It was an English class last year. It was bullshit. It had nothing to do with my course, but had to take it. This is why they're pointless. Social studies, what the fuck has social studies put out recently? Going back to the article, it says, furthermore, she also worries that the evaluation of math skills can perpetuate discrimination against minorities, especially if they do worse than their white counterparts. If one is not viewed as mathematical, there will always be a sense of inferiority that can be summoned, she says, adding that there are so many minorities who, quote, have experienced microaggressions from participating in math classrooms where people are judged by whether they can reason abstractly. Oh, Jesus. I've been there. I have been in front of the classroom working on a problem that I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. Yes, it's embarrassing. But a microaggression? No, it's an embarrassing situation because you don't know the answer to the problem. But in the end, you get taught how to do it. And you know what? You'll probably remember it because it's a goddamn embarrassing moment. You don't forget those. So you're going to remember that moment when you're standing up there and the teacher's teaching you in front of the whole class how to do the fucking problem. And you stand there and feel like an idiot. But, some people are offended by this, or some people are embarrassed by this. Yeah, I do get embarrassed by that, but fuck your microaggressions. To fight this, Gutierrez encourages aspiring math teachers to develop a sense of political conocimiento, a Spanish phrase for political knowledge for teaching. Gutierrez stresses that all knowledge is relational, asserting that things cannot be known objectively. They must be known subjectively. That is probably the most dangerous thing she said. Because that is the narrative being pushed around. Nothing is objective. There are no truths. That is postmodernism. Now, quite interesting, I've come across a guy recently called Thaddeus Russell who actually pushes back against what we these days are referring to as postmodernism. He says all this thing that Jordan Peterson, myself, and everyone else talks about as being postmodernist thought and the problem with today's society. He says it's not the way it seems, or things have been taken out of context, so it's really not postmodernism the way it is. I'm going to look into this and eventually report back on it, but I don't think I share his same view on that. But he's a smart man, he's a professor, and he seems to know his shit. And he has a big problem with the way that SJWs and people act these days, but he just doesn't seem to believe it's postmodernism. But to say that you cannot know a truth objectively is terrible, because then there really is no truth, and then everything depends on how you feel or what you think is right, and that's not always the case. In fact, a lot of times that can lead people down a dark road, because if what I do is right, then really nothing I do is wrong. It's not quite that straightforward, but it's just an example. There's more to it than that. But if there is no truth, then what's real? What's not? If everything's societal or environmental, then all of our everything is meaningless, because there's nothing you can do. It's all societal. Every problem in your life is societal and environmental. You're not responsible for anything that's happened. It's all the way that other people view you and have treated you. And when you bring this into mathematics, which is supposed to have an objective answer, a definitive answer, 2 plus 2 equals 4, when you start saying that you cannot know anything objectively and everything has to be subjective, then does that mean that subjectively 2 plus 2 can equal 5, if that's what it is? Because if that's what somebody believes, because that's what they know. It's not true, but this is the sort of narrative they're pushing these days. So we move on now to our second article from campusreform.com, and this is written by the exact same author as the last one. I got linked to this article through the last one, talking about how math perpetuates white privilege. It was one of the following related articles that she had written. This one came out on August 4th, 2017, and it says, Prof complains about masculinization of mathematics. A Vanderbilt University professor recently complained in an academic journal article that the field of mathematics is a white and heteronormative masculinized space. According to Professor Louis Leyva, children are implicitly taught from an early age to associate, innovate, problem solving with masculinity, while viewing conformity and meekness as feminist traits. I think he means feminized traits, but either way. In a recent article titled Unpacking the Male Superiority Myth and Masculinization of Mathematics at the Intersection, Professor Louis A. Leyva argued that the factors such as teachers' expectations and cultural norms, quote, serve as gendering mechanisms that give rise to sex-based achievement differences, end quote. Citing the masculinization of mathematics, Leyva then suggested that the apparent gender gap in mathematical abilities is socially constructed as opposed to arising from inherently different cognitive abilities, and therefore a myth of male superiority. This myth is further perpetuated by teachers who point out instances of female underachievement, Leyva claims, asserting that doing so can contribute to the masculinization of the domain that unfairly holds students to men's higher levels of achievement and participation as a measure of success. Even children are complicit in the problem, Leyva argues. Children. Citing a 1998 study suggesting that gendered associations with problem-solving strategies may cause girls and boys to pursue different approaches to solving the same problem even at the earliest stages of schooling. According to that study, the associations may be rife through the teacher-student interactions, leading students to associate masculine traits of independence and confidence with innovative problem-solving approaches while contributing to the use of standard algorithms to feminine traits of compliance and meekness. So that study, that 1998 study that he quoted, here it is. Yeah, that's the whole thing. That is the whole thing. And essentially, as far as I could tell, they didn't actually take a study group. They just made a paper and called it a study. But anyway, the study goes on to talk about how essentially the teachers themselves are teaching the students, the children, the men, to essentially get a little creative with your math formulas while teaching women the standard math formula and told to follow it. That is their whole argument based in this article, in this study here. This looks very similar to, not to a study, but to a lot of papers that come out of the humanities these days. These are graduate term papers, and they come out with one page specifying some bullshit problem that is wrong with society. A lot of times they link them to society and environment as being the causal factors, and that's it. I have seen countless professors talk about this on Twitter and just all over that just say these are bullshit. They literally come with no citation, no information, although this they gave in the whole thing, 2 citations of some bullshit studies. I mean, one of these authors, Janet Shirley Hyde, we can see from credentials, she's a professor of psychology, but she deals with women's studies, and she specialized in psychology of women and gender difference in mathematic performances. These are bullshit credentials, and they're writing bullshit papers. They are only relying on what they've been taught and what they think, but they're not going to actual studies. They're not using groups as an experiment and seeing what happens the way a scientific process would be done. Instead, they wrote what they felt was the problem, and then they published it. And in turn, this professor took that study and quoted it to make his point about the masculinization of mathematics. So bullshit professors wrote a bullshit story that another professor is using to justify a bullshit problem. That's essentially what you need to take out of this. Let's go look at some real studies that have been done on this issue. We got this one from the U.S. National Library of Medicine, National Institute of Health. And it's the science of sex differences in science and mathematics. And in here, in the summary, I read through more than just the summary, but it does give you all the information. It talks about how on a day-to-day basis between the average individual that, yeah, there's very little difference to it. But men tend to peak more on the edges. They're much more inconsistent than women are. So if we're taking this as sort of a bell curve as an example, men tend to appear on both the highest and the lowest levels of mathematics skills than women, and women tend to appear right in the middle. And considering how fields of study, such as mathematics, tend to take the highest level out of there, considering how men tend to appear on the extremes a lot more, that would suggest that there would be more men in the highest brackets as well as in the lowest brackets. Men would be the smartest and the dumbest majority in mathematics. It's kind of funny how that works out. So that's where this gender gap comes from. It's that there's less women on both the dumb end of mathematics and the high end of mathematics, and they tend to be more in the middle. So if we're looking at this as a bell curve, women would have a much sharper middle bell curve because more women would find themselves in the middle, and men would have a much more gradual bell curve. So women would be sharp, men would be gradual, showing that there would be more men on both extremes. This is what this study is saying. There's more studies out there that back them up. I just decided to take this one, but I did find a few more when I was searching for them that did pretty much say the same thing. Returning to the article, it says, Leva acknowledges that there have been significant progress in recent years with regards to the way researchers conceptualize race and gender, but content that there remains much analytical space to examine gender as a social construct and how this differential affects students' mathematics achievements. He concludes by expressing a hope that future analysis of gender in mathematics take a more intersectional approach, lamenting the fact that intersectional consideration of mathematic achievements and participation shaped by whiteness and sexuality were left out by many of the studies he reviewed. That's because they don't fucking matter in terms of math skills. But for some reason, neither him nor the last professor, Gutierrez, wants to take this into consideration. When you're dealing with numbers, the color of your skin is not the significant factor, and the gender is not the significant factor. Because just because more women appear on the middle and more men appear on the spectrums, that doesn't mean that there aren't women, and there aren't, even if, again, we look at it and say that men appeared more on the farther spectrum. Even if we looked at it again and saw that white people appeared on the farther spectrum than other races, that still does not mean that none of those races will ever get in. That just means there's probably going to be less people from that gender, from that race, who have those skills in order to get into that field. It's not that those people aren't getting into the field. It's because the rest don't have the skills required. I mean, just as an example, let's just say, for the sake of argument, white people weren't the dominant race and we were the minority right now. Let's just say we had the history of black people. With my math skills, should I be in a high-end math industry? No, I shouldn't. I know that's not how things have turned out, but even so, even as a white person, I still should not be in one of the high-end jobs that require a lot of math. I will have the math skills to get me by in my job, but I in no means will be a mathematician or an expert on math. I'll just know what I need to do to get the job done. So personally, I find these two arguments kind of bullshit. But before we completely throw these articles in the trash, here's one more bit to talk about, which is intersectionality theory from black feminist thought, he adds, can allow for more nuanced analysis of gender and its relation to mathematical performances. It is therefore critical that scholars examine the influences of different contexts in students' mathematics achievement and experiences at intersections of gender and other socially constructed identities, he concludes. It's one thing I've come to notice about the social justice warriors and progressives alike. I actually first noticed it when I was watching the Young Turks back a few years ago. They always love to talk about how nuanced things are, that everything is nuanced. Everything is not nuanced. Yes, there are nuances in life, and sometimes they come into effect. This is not one of them. Your race is not a nuance. Even your gender, maybe even though women appear more in the middle, is not a nuance factor, because in the end, what really matters is, do you have the math skills? Do you have the math skills to do the job? And when it comes to teaching, it doesn't just have to do with math skills. A good personal skills are necessary because you've got to get the information across. But these are some of the problems with the colleges that people are having these days, colleges and universities, is just they're trying to preach this bullshit. And now the problem is, I stated it on my last episode when I was talking about the British Medical Association, the problem is now is that it's seeped into the hard sciences. Before, it was just the soft sciences. Now, things that have objective answers are being told that, well, they're nuanced and they're subjective. We can't look at them objectively. This is why we're all screwed, because if something such as math can suddenly get hit by social justice and can be poisoned in order to essentially change the way mathematics is done because it's unfair to some, that's what these professors think, then we're really fucked, because math and science are not subjective. They're objective. There is a definite answer. They tell you what things are. 4 plus 4 equals 8. It's not subjective, as much as they want to push it. So I really hope this does not come to affect me and I don't have to deal with this shit at some point, but we'll see. If it's starting to seep into the mathematics, I'm waiting for it to come up. So the next story I want to talk about, we are discussing a report that came out of the Fraser Institute. And what it said is that under our current leadership, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is amassing the most debt for the country, and more specifically, the most personal debt for Canadians. He is setting a record to do this, and he is doing it without a major war or a recession. That he is the worst prime minister for racking up debt for Canadians without a major war or a recession. That's really should be all you need to know. But let's look into this. So the Fraser Institute went all the way back to Confederation, and they looked into how much debt was amassed from each prime minister. And they took things into consideration. For example, some of the most spending ever done in Canadian history happened during World War I and World War II, and those are understandable. During those major war efforts, you would definitely have to spend more money. So they took those into consideration and didn't really fault the prime minister for that, because things like that are out of their control. Also, when it comes to recession, they also gave him more of a pass on it, saying, recessions a lot of times are out of the prime minister's control and they're just forced to deal with it. So they took those into account. But what this report says is historical context is important for understanding debt accumulation under various prime ministers. For example, total growth in debt per person under Sir Robert Borden, 188%, and William Lyon Mackenzie King, 145%, took place during global conflicts, the two world wars, and multiple economic downturns. Economic downturns, which are out of the direct control of the prime minister, contribute to the accumulation of the government debt. The federal government collects less revenue and spends more during an economic downturn as Canadians make greater use of services such as employment insurance. However, of the prime ministers who did not face a global conflict or economic downturn during their tenure, the analysis finds that by the end of his term in 2019, Justin Trudeau is expected to be the largest debt accumulator, 5%. The only other two prime ministers to increase federal debt without fighting a world war or experiencing an economic downturn are Sir Mackenzie Bowell and Sir John Abbott, who both served in the late 19th century. So as we take a look at our first graph here, we can see that it measures all the way from 1939. So this graph here is taking all the way from 1939, beginning of the Second World War. And as we take a look at this graph, we can see that the spending after the Second World War, the debt after the Second World War dropped. Then it began a steady increase throughout the time, raised sharply under Harper, but that one was due to the 2008 bankers crash that happened, so that was why he did. And then under Harper, we pretty much had a steady decline until he reached the very last year. But as we can see, when Justin Trudeau took over, he immediately, all the way up to now, 2017, has continuously been growing more and more in personal debt. So another article that was put out by the Fraser Institute was Prime Minister Trudeau on track to set record for increasing federal debt. Just 2 years into his first mandate, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's legacy on federal debt has taken form, and is not good. Trudeau, in his first term, is on track to increase federal debt by more than any other prime minister not burdened by war or recession. Racking up debt is no small matter. When government debt grows, more resources are needed to pay for interest costs, diverting tax dollars away from public programs and services. Increasing the debt also saddles future generations with higher taxes to pay for today's government spending. They're talking about us. Anybody my age, around my age, or a little bit younger, we're the ones who are going to be paying for this in the future. I think this is literally going to breed a bunch of conservatives in my generation for this sole reason. I seriously think once millennials see how much shit and how much debt Trudeau has left us in, I really think they're going to see a big push away from liberalism, and you're going to see a lot more millennial conservatives pop up. Only 7 other prime ministers in Canada's 150-year history have similarly not faced a world war or recession during their tenure. Of these prime ministers, Trudeau is expected to increase per-person federal debt the most, by a projected 5% when his first term ends in 2019. While 5% may seem like a small amount, it's the equivalent of $97 billion in new debt, or $1,396 more debt for each Canadian to shoulder. Holy shit. I don't have that type of money, do you? And think about it, that's everybody. That's the senior, that's the fucking newborns, that's everybody. So if we take into account those who can't work, and those because they're too elderly or disabled, and those who are too young to work, then think about how much more that increases for every single millennial. That number probably would go up 3-4 times. So now we're talking about an extra $5,000 debt per working millennial, essentially. I'm just guesstimating these numbers. I have no basis for these numbers. In stark contrast, other Liberal prime ministers who also did not face a world war or recession during their tenure reduces per-person federal debt. Jean Chrétien, he reduced by 13%, Paul Martin by 8%, Lester Pearson by 6%. In total, 5 prime ministers of 8 who governed in the absence of world war or recession reduced the inflation-adjusted per-person federal debt burden. Unlike Prime Minister Trudeau, these prime ministers seized the opportunity in times of relative peace and economic stability and left a legacy of lower debt for future Canadians. That doesn't mean they were good prime ministers. Paul Martin was weak, and Jean Chrétien lost a lot of fucking money. Well, lost it. I mean, it went missing, and everyone's pretty sure it was pocketed by his Liberal government, and his excuse was, we have the money, we just don't know where it is. and that money never turned up again. So that doesn't mean they were good, but hey, they did lower our personal debt. After only 2 years in office, Trudeau's legacy on federal debt is already becoming clear, and future generations of Canadians will pay for it. Financial Post jumped on this, and they ended up saying about how spending is now 22% higher than the peak incurred during the depths of Second World War under William Lyon Mackenzie King. 22% higher. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau began to increase per-person spending immediately after his election in October 2015. The Harper Conservatives originally planned for per-person spending to reach $7,342 in 2015, but the Trudeau Liberals cranked this up to $7,557. Put differently, the Trudeau Liberals increased per-person spending in 2015 by almost 3% more than the previous Harper government had planned. Spending was further increased in 2016, and the federal government's plan to spend $8,337 in the current fiscal year, 2017-2018. This is only $38 shy of the all-time high-level per-person spending record in 2009-2010 by Harper's Conservative government. The peak spending under the Harper government, however, was done during a significant global recession. So as we take a look at our second graph here, which is a closer up on the finish here, I added in, on this graph, I added in the names of the prime ministers, and also at the top, as you can see, I added in which political party they are affiliated with. So it's true, as we look here, it seems to be about about 2008, 2009, and 2010 when we had that peak right there, roughly. But then since then, Trudeau has pretty much, if we look at it close, he's about matched what Harper's highest debt was, and that was during the worst recession we had had since the Great Depression. So this is where Trudeau has left us. Anybody out there that has seen my videos that does like Trudeau, because I tend to smash him a lot, I hope you're starting to see what I see, what I saw from, not from right at the beginning, but pretty damn early on. I didn't vote for Trudeau, but when he came into office, I said to myself, all right, let's see what he can do. Pretty much the same thing I said about Trump. Let's see what he could do. And early on, I was not impressed. The only thing I would say that I defended him early on was that fucking elbow gate, which some may remember, which he accidentally elbowed a female NDP member. That one I thought was a bullshit claim by the NDP. The only thing Trudeau did wrong in that situation, the NDP were blocking the Conservative whip from getting to the front during the beginning of Parliament. And Trudeau walked up, grabbed him by the arm, and helped him get through the NDP. He was pretty much just pissed off that they were deliberately blocking him. But the Conservative whip was not happy that Trudeau did that and grabbed his arm and helped him through. So that's where Trudeau fucked up. But as for the whole elbow thing, it was bullshit. Anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just quick Google will show you what it is. There's a video of it. It's like 30 seconds. Just go check it out. You can probably find it on YouTube. But as we return to the Financial Post article, it goes, spending is also 14.4% higher than the peak of federal per-person spending reached under Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau Sr. Unlike his father's record of spending, Trudeau's current plan is actually start reducing per-person spending next year. The federal government's most recent budget called for a 1.1% reduction in per-person spending by 2019-2020. This stands in stark contrast to the Prime Minister's father who, along with his predecessor Lester Pearson, ramped up federal per-person spending adjusted for inflation. From $2,837 in 1962 to a peak of $7,288 in 1982, an increase of 156.9%. So we seem to have a little bit of conflict here from the Financial Post and the Fraser Institute that was written, because here they're suggesting that Lester Pearson ramped up federal per-person spending. But at the same time, if we look back at the Fraser Institute, they're saying that he dropped it by 6%. I think in this situation, I'm a little more inclined to go along with the article written from the Fraser Institute on that, because they were the one that conducted the survey. So I believe that they're probably more right on Lester B. Pearson. But there's no doubt that Trudeau Sr. ramped up a lot of spending on personal debt during his time in office. I've heard countless older people who have lived through Trudeau Sr.'s tenure that he did ramp up a lot of debt and spending. Whether the federal government will follow through on its plans to reduce federal spending in the 2 years prior to the next federal election is a legitimate question, but it's nonetheless the current plan. That said, even with the planned 1.1% reduction in federal per-person spending, the federal government will expect at least $23.4 billion deficit in 2019-2020. To reach a balanced budget in those years, which was the Liberal Party's original campaign commitment, the government would have to reduce per-person spending by 6.4% over the next 2 years. That would be a ridiculous amount. That would be 3.2% every year. And I don't know if we could do that. I mean, it doesn't sound like a lot when we're talking percentages, but it is a lot of money in real terms. A lot of debt would have to be canceled out by Trudeau, which I don't see happening, but it is supposed to happen within the next 2 years. Once again, though, 3.2% each year at least in order to get that done. So because I was trying to get the other side's view on this as well, I pulled up a couple articles on it. First one's from the Ottawa Sun, the second one's from the Toronto Sun. The Suns are generally a more conservative paper, so I wanted to get their opinion on it. And in fact, it was actually, it was the Ottawa Sun I saw this article in originally. I was sitting in a McDonald's with my wife, and there just happened to be a paper on the table. I flipped through and I saw that, so this is really what led me on the way. But in this article from the Ottawa Sun, they ended up having a quote from Charles Lemam, the Fraser Institute Director of Fiscal Studies, and he ends up saying, "The government debt matters. Higher debt means more tax dollars are diverted away from important public programs, and it leaves future generations on the hook to pay for today's spending." Of prime ministers who did experience recession or World War during their time in office, Stephen Harper increased per-person federal debt by 11%, Brian Mulroney by 42%, and Pierre Trudeau by 57% during his second term in office from 1980 to 84, and by 35% during his first term in office from 1968 to 1978. The Fraser study assessed the debt accumulation records of 20 of Canada's 23 prime ministers going back to Confederation in 1867, excluding only Kim Campbell, John Turner, and Charles Tupper because their terms in office were too short to provide reliable data. Each one had not even a year in office, maybe a year in office before they were out. As we move on to the Toronto Sun article, it says, during the 2015 election, Trudeau predicted his budget would balance itself with a $1 billion surplus in the fourth and final year of his election mandate in 2019. At the time, he also predicted the federal government under his leadership would experience a modest deficit of $9.9 billion in 2016-2017, $9.5 billion in 2017-2018, and $5.7 billion in 2018-2019. But that was then, and this is now. In Tuesday's economic statement, Morneau reported Canada's deficit in 2016-2017 was actually $17.8 billion, 80% higher than Trudeau predicted in 2015. Going forward, Morneau predict the deficit will be $19.9 billion in 2017-2018, 102% higher than Trudeau said it would be, and $18.6 billion in 2018-2019, 226% higher than Trudeau said it would be. This is why I was nervous about his plan, because his plan required everything to work perfectly. And there's so much unforeseen circumstances that happen within 4 years. A very good example would be the hurricanes that happened back in the summer that flooded parts of Quebec. Nobody could see that coming, but it happened. And then we had to take care of that. That would cost millions of dollars to clean up. In 2020, the year Trudeau predicted Canada would achieve a $1 billion surplus under his fiscal leadership, Morneau now predicts the deficit will be $17.3 billion. Should Trudeau win the next federal election in 2019, Morneau predicts Trudeau's deficit will be $16.8 billion in 2020-2021, $13.9 billion in 21-22, and $12.5 billion in 22-23. So Trudeau is the spending prime minister. That really seems to be all he's been doing, is just spend, 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 which he did say that he was going to be spending under his time. He did say that, we have to spend, and then eventually once we spend on infrastructure, the budget will balance itself. Yeah, that's not happening. Under Trudeau's Liberal government, we're seeing some of the worst debt we've ever accumulated. And this, just over the last 2 years, the amount he's gotten is scary. Now let's look at how much is going to happen over the next 2 years. And come hell and high water, should he be elected again come 2019, which, as one older friend that I speak to, Vince, he's told me before that very many prime ministers, more than not, will get a second term in office. I am hoping this is not Trudeau. But there's a good chance that he will get another term in office, because many prime ministers do. They get at least 2 years. And even recently, when was the last time a president only had 1 term in office? Hell, maybe Trump will be the first one in a while to only have 1 term in office, but if we think back, it's been a while. So all this debt Trudeau is building up is going to come back on us younger people. I'm not crazy for what's coming, because I look around now, I see my groceries have gone up. Some of my bills are going up. My landlord recently just installed, for anybody living in Minto in Ottawa, I'm sure you can relate, my landlord just installed paid visitors parking. Yeah, like you would do downtown in a city, you now have to pay just to use the visitors parking. This means that if somebody wants to come up to my apartment for 5 minutes to come grab something, they've either got to pay for an hour to park there, which, sure, it's only $1, but you're still fucking paying, or they've got to park it there, and then they've got to risk that Minto security doesn't come around and then ticket them. Because even if it's 5 minutes, ever since they put those up, the security cars have been making a lot of patrols around the visitors parking to make sure people are using them. So this is what's happening under Trudeau. I do think that everything is related. The higher groceries, I do think that my landlord raising my rent recently and my landlord installing these has to do with the way the economy is doing it under Trudeau. If we had a better economy, like, our landlord now is pinching for every pennies they can get, and they're doing it from everybody, and everybody's doing that now because of all the taxes Trudeau is introducing and all the debt he's accumulating. I worry that he's going to put us in, by the time he's done, into a shithole. But there's nothing we can do right now. With a liberal majority government, and as much as he talks about a transparent government, he tends to seem to rule it with an iron fist. They have to vote certain ways, and if he feels that he wants his whole cabinet to vote on him, they've got to, or they face disciplinary actions. Trudeau is one of the worst prime ministers we've ever had. He honestly is one of the worst prime ministers. I think that even if Pierre Elliott Trudeau's name is still held in some high esteem by some people, and really it's because he was the one who started the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I do have a feeling that that the Trudeau name, especially after Justin's been in office, is officially been dragged through the mud, and that after this, nobody's going to want a Trudeau. If Justin's son or daughter comes up and wants to be in politics and wants to be prime minister someday, I'm hoping that the millennials will remember that we already went through this. And I'm hoping that our kids will have enough common sense that we can talk to them and say, guys, we've already done this twice with Trudeau's and we got fucked over royally. Do not make the same mistake a third time. Because Generation X made that mistake, and now Generation Y, my generation, the millennials, have made that mistake. Let's make sure that Generation Z does not make that mistake as well. Because if we do, we're going to be recovering from this for a long time after Trudeau's done. I mean, just take a look at the debt. You can see here, we're up to $1 trillion in debt according to the National Debt Clock.org. We got $1 trillion in debt. I remember under Harper that we were up to $500 billion, and everyone was like, holy shit. Now, look at where we're at. Look at our interest per year. $28 billion per year is our interest. Our interest per second, $889. We're up to $31,000 in debt each And our debt is 61.9% of our current GDP. What the hell are we going to do? How are we supposed to solve this problem? Where is this money we're going to come from? I mean, this is like a person being in debt and going on a gambling spree at a casino. It's the worst thing you can do. And now you're selling off pieces of your home, your furniture, your electronics, your car. This is what it seems like we're doing right now. It's going to lead us down a bad path. I really worry about how this is going to affect me and my family, and how this is going to make things a lot harder in the future for every Canadian out there. Because I've also noticed historically, what ends up happening a lot is that countries, in a desperate attempt to hold on, will mass print money. They will just keep producing money. They water it down to the point where your money is meaningless, and then you default anyway. It's like using a credit card to pay off your bills, like using a credit card to pay off a credit card. Sooner or later, you might stay ahead of the game for a while, but sooner or later, that entire massive debt that you've accumulated is going to build up, and you're going to have to pay it off. That's exactly what's happening here. So, come 2019, vote out Trudeau. Do not fall for his charm or his nice hair or his social justice or his feminism. Vote him out.